Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we theorycraft and explore different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we're continuing the Gloomhaven series of character builds, where we're trying to take the character classes from the hit board game Gloomhaven and recreate them in Dungeons & Dragons. Today is another one of our locked character classes, where we're going to be trying to make the Eclipse class from Gloomhaven. So as usual, this is our spoiler warning for locked classes. If you don't want any spoilers for the Gloomhaven board game, or at least not this class in particular, then feel free to watch the video at a later time. I won't take any offense. If you already know the character class though, or you just don't care about spoilers, or even if you just want to see how the build works in D&D and what this character sort of does, then feel free to come along for the journey. I'll do a quick pause here, and then we'll jump into the build. Okay, with that spoiler warning out of the way, let's get started. Today we're making the Eclipse class in D&D, which is also known as the Night Shroud. The Night Shroud is by far my favorite character class from the Gloomhaven board game. They are an assassin type character, and an expert one at that. They mainly revolve around three things, and that is creating darkness, going invisible, and just executing enemies. No attack or damage required. When looking at how to translate this into D&D, we can definitely get the creation of darkness through some spells and a little bit of flavoring, and we can definitely get invisibility, since invisibility exists in D&D. What's going to be a little bit tougher to recreate are the abilities that can just execute enemies. There's no real way, besides power word kill, for example, to just end an enemy without actually attacking or dealing damage to it. So we're probably going to have to suspend our disbelief a little bit and take features that give us a high output of damage that can hopefully just one-shot an enemy and count that as an execute ability. It's not ideal, but it's what we're going to have to work with. Before we actually start into the level breakdown of the build though, let's look at their flavor text. The Aether Night Shroud. Thought to once be human, Aethers were an intellectual society that delved too deeply into studies of transplanar travel. Something went horribly wrong, and they now live an eternal existence trapped between the planes, forced to forever witness infinite realities at once. Aethers interact with other races as little as possible, preferring to stay out of their mundane goings-on. An Aether's thirst for knowledge, however, is insatiable, and they are willing to use their powers of shifting reality to further this pursuit. How an Aether pursues their goals exactly can be as diverse as the infinite planes themselves. Whatever powers brought an end to the Aether Society left some with a particularly strong affinity to planes of pure darkness. With the ability to cloak himself in shadow and pass through the world unseen, the Night Shroud becomes a deadly stalker, using blades and stealth to eliminate any target. Rather than working with other races to gather knowledge, the Night Shroud prefers to pry the knowledge from their cold, dead fingers. Starting at character creation now, with our lineage, we're going to probably be using custom lineage. Like the flavor text said, we were thought once to be human, but now we're something completely different. We are an Aether, or Aether, depending on, I guess, how you pronounce it, or if you pronounce the S. The Aethers are an interesting lineage, given that they could sort of have some duplicates in D&D, but there's nothing that's perfectly exact given how variable an Aether really is. As an Aether, we are a humanoid being that has become split and perfectly entwined with some sort of plane of existence. In the case of the Night Shroud, that is a plane of pure darkness. For us, I think custom lineage fits that pretty well, even though human variant is arguably also doable. But something like Aasimar or even Kalashtar from the Eberron setting are also kind of similar in the theme of a humanoid who is a bit more than just human. For us though, custom lineage is what we're going to go with, and as a custom lineage Aether, we are definitely going to pick up the dark vision instead of the skill. We're fused with the plane of night, so therefore we want at least a little bit of dark vision to start off with. For our free feat, we are of course going to take Shadow Touched. Shadow Touched gives us a first level enchantment or necromancy spell that we can cast once per day for free or with spell slots. And we also get invisibility, which we can cast the same way. We also get a +1 to either intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, and we'll worry about that in a sec. But for the spell, we want to take Inflict Wounds. This is a big bomb of a spell, and that is going to be our Execute for at least a little while. It's going to also be our first shadow weapon, so we'll basically pretend, or at least theme it, that when we cast a spell, we're conjuring a blade of pure shadow, and that is what is going to be inflicting the wounds into our enemies. For our stats, we're going to take the +2 from Custom Lineage and put it into Dexterity, and the +1 from Shadow Touched and put it into Charisma. This will give us a fairly balanced character, and after point buy, we'll end up with the following ability scores: 8 Strength, 16 Dexterity, 14 Constitution, 10 Intelligence, 10 Wisdom, and 16 Charisma. Feel free to redistribute these ability scores as you see fit, but keep in mind that that'll probably add some variability to our build. For our background, we definitely want something along the lines of criminal. The Night Shroud isn't necessarily bad, but they also don't normally act within the law. But pick whatever you believe would work best for our theme, keeping in mind the idea that we just sort of get what we want. Doesn't really matter how we get it, but also that we're infused with an actual plane of existence, so that might add to some interesting background choices. Starting the actual level breakdown of the build, at level 1, we are Rogue 1. The Night Shroud is literally an edgy rogue, including in how you unlock them. The Night Shroud is personal quests, or being a really bad party. They are infused with the plane of darkness, they're all about being an assassin, and sneaky and stealthy. They are the edgy rogue. So, for Rogue 1, we're going to gain Thieves' Cant, Sneak Attack, which starts off as 1d6 and will increase as we go, and we're also going to gain Expertise. Expertise, I would pick Stealth and Perception to be an expert at, but feel free to change that up if you want. At level 2, we are a Rogue 2, and we're going to gain Cunning Action and all that comes with it. This is the ability to dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus action, and thanks to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, we could also aim. We're not really going to use that too much, but we have it if we need it. At level 3, we're still a rogue, and now we get to choose our subclass. Our sneak attack also increases to 2d6, by the way, which is pretty nice. That means every attack we make that can trigger sneak attack is going to basically deal the equivalent of a greatsword with damage, so we're already a pretty heavy hitter. Now for the subclass, there are a couple good options, and the honorable mentions would go out to both Arcane Trickster and Phantom Rogue. They're both fairly thematic subclasses, but we're not going to pick either of them, unfortunately. The one that we are going to pick is Soul Knife. Soul Knife is admittedly a bit more psionic in nature, but we can reflavor it so that our powers are more shadow-oriented than psychic-oriented, and when we do, I think it actually fits our theme pretty perfectly. The two features we get when we pick Soul Knife are Psionic Power and Psychic Blades. Psionic Power is a nice feature that gives us a number of psi die equal to our double our proficiency bonus. Psi die are similar to the Psi Warrior Fighter subclass, like we had in Mind Thief. And we can spend these dice on either boosting a skill check or communicating telepathically with another creature. I like to think that the telepathy is us communicating through shadows, and that the skill check is a boost to our skill based on our own prowess being enhanced by raw darkness. Second, the Psychic Blades are our own personal weapons. We can now manifest blades of psychic energy. They can look like however you want, so flavor them however you want. But ideally, we're going to flavor them as being shadow energy. They do deal psychic damage, but so does the spell Shadow Blade, and that's a very shadow-oriented spell. So it's not too hard to reflavor these psychic blades as blades of just pure shadow that we can then use to attack our enemies. They're going to be our bread and butter for delivering sneak attack, and while we will get cooler options in our shadow weapon arsenal, these are our current go-to and are going to go alongside inflict wounds. We no longer need physical weapons, we can just run around empty-handed and just conjure our own blades of pure shadow energy to attack our enemies with. We're definitely on track to being a Night Shroud. Level 4, we're going to pause Rogue for a quick second in order to gain more control over darkness, as well as pick up some other spell casting. Here, I'm going to start into some levels of Sorcerer. To be honest, we can actually multi-class into a couple different classes. Not all of them would necessarily be spellcasters. There are so many darkness-themed subclasses in D&D that we could really choose a couple different ones that would work pretty well. For us, though, more spell slots means more invisibility and more inflict wounds, and that's really what we want. We're going to take Sorcerer 1, and when we're going to get to pick our bloodline, we're going to pick Shadow Magic. Pretty on point. Shadow Magic gets us both Eyes of the Dark and Strength of the Grave. Strength of the Grave isn't too important, but it may come in handy from time to time. It's a cling to life feature, but it doesn't automatically work, so it isn't the most reliable. It's a saving throw. Once we get dropped to 0 hit points, we could end up at 1 instead, but we don't really want to get hit anyways. Eyes of the Dark, on the other hand, is a big dark vision buff, and eventually we'll actually get to cast the darkness spell and be able to see through it. And that's always a good combo in D&D, so we're excited for when that eventually happens. At level 5, we're going to go back to Rogue 4, and here we're going to gain an ASI/feat. This is where I'm going to take the feat Eldritch Adept, which isn't necessary, but it's kind of thematic that we take it, and I'll tell you why. But it's the reason we went to Sorcerer first before coming back to get this, because we needed the actual spell casting feature as a prerequisite, as opposed to just being able to use our spells from Shadow Touched. Feel free to skip this level if you want, though, again, I think it's pretty thematic, and the reason for that is because with Eldritch Adept, we're going to take the invocation Armor of Shadows. Armor of Shadows, mechanically, just lets us cast Mage Armor at will. Mage Armor, however, is the equivalent of a +1 studded leather armor, which is way better than any physical armor we could get, and to be honest, it's very thematic in that if we're creating just an Armor of Shadows, then we can run around not just without weapons, but without armor, and everything we're relying on is just pure shadow. At level 6, we're going to go back to Sorcerer and go up to Sorcerer 2. We now have Font of Magic, which is also known as sorcery points. So far, these points are only used to refuel our spell slots, but we'll still take that. I should also mention now that we have 3 first level spell slots, which means 4 castings of our Inflict Wounds, plus another one when we use our sorcery points. Oh, and we also get 4 cantrips, but pick your favorites. Just make sure that they're a little dark themed or can be dark themed, and never really use them unless you have to, since we want to either make our weapon attacks with our Shadow Blades or use Inflict Wounds as our big bomb execute. At level 7, we are a Sorcerer 3, which means we gain Meta Magic as well as second level spells or spell slots. Here, for our Meta Magic, we're going to take Quickened and Twin Spell. Both are very powerful options and are a really good boost to our action economy. One really awesome trick we can actually do is walk up to an enemy, Quicken Spell, Inflict Wounds to cast it as a bonus action, hopefully we hit, and then stab them with our action with our Psychic Blade for some follow-up sneak attack damage. Maybe we can get advantage on at least one of those if we're invisible to start with, hint hint, but ideally those 2 attacks back to back should hopefully just kill an enemy, or at least a weak enemy at this point. At level 8, we're going to go up to Sorcerer 4, and here we gain another ASI/feat. Here we're also finally increasing our dexterity to 18. Took a while to get here, but we're glad to finally have it. At level 9, our sneak attack is really starting to fall behind since it's only 2d6, and we kind of want to make up for that. We're going to jump back to Rogue 5 for just a second, and only a second, and we're going to gain Uncanny Dodge, which eats our reaction if we get attacked, but also has the damage from that attack, so it's a nice little save. And we'll also get our sneak attack to be boosted up to 3d6, which is a bit better than 2d6. At level 10, we're going to go back to Sorcerer 5, and we're now going to gain their big power boost of 3rd level spells/spell slots. Pick your favorite of these though, just make sure to keep them dark themed as per usual. We probably wanted to pick up Shadow Blade at one point since sorcerers do have access to it, and it's a pretty powerful weapon. It does actually trigger with sneak attack, so if you didn't want to use your Psychic Blades, you could cast Shadow Blade, walk up to an enemy, Inflict Wounds, Shadow Blade, that whole combo all over again, but just make sure whatever we're picking is thematic. Speaking of concentration, one thing I'll mention is that concentration is really spoken for with either the invisibility spell, the darkness spell being cast through sorcery points so we can see through it, or, again, Shadow Blade if we pick that up. So just be aware of that. Personally, I would just wait for the right moment and cast Inflict Wounds at 3rd level. It would basically be like a Paladin Smite, but you can choose what you want to spend your 3rd level spell slots on, or what you want to spend your concentration on. At level 11, we're going to go up to Sorcerer 6, and here we gain our next Shadow Magic feature. That is going to be Hound of Ill Omen. It's a pretty cool feature, but I'm going to be honest, we're never going to use it. It costs sorcery points to cast, which first of all isn't great because that means we can't use them for meta magic. Second of all, it's a very mediocre summon type feature, and the Night Shroud doesn't have summons in Gloomhaven, so we're not really looking for this anyways. And it also doesn't really boost our damage output or make us invisible, which are the 2 things that the Night Shroud, at least in D&D, really want. The only reason I've bothered going this far into Sorcerer and picking up this feature is because of what comes next level. So just ignore this for now and wait till we're level 12 to get the really cool ability. At level 12, we are Sorcerer 7, and this actually ends our Sorcerer levels for the build. We have 7 sorcery points, which should be more than enough for a day of adventuring, and we also have a 4th level spell slot, and we get to pick a 4th level spell. We have finally gotten the reason I went this far into Sorcerer, which is Greater Invisibility. This is our new be-all, end-all concentration spell. We can just cast it, and for 1 minute we are invisible, no ifs or buts about it. It's not going to be great all the time based on the enemies we're fighting, but most of the time it's going to be really good. We are the Night Shroud, and we have finally mastered what it means to be invisible. We can just go and attack and disappear and do whatever we want, all while being completely unseen. Even though it only lasts a minute, we'll be able to do a lot in that 1 minute of just unbroken invisibility. At level 13, we're going to jump back to Rogue, and we're just staying there for the rest of the build. We're kind of scaling pretty poorly in terms of being like a martial-gish character that's going to go up and deal damage, but the reason for that was Greater Invisibility from last level, and perhaps I kind of oversold how powerful it is, but as the Night Shroud, what we want to do is go invisible and not have that invisibility break because of an attack or casting a spell. Greater Invisibility solves that, and so now we're going to solve the problem of our poor scaling. So now that we're Rogue 6, we're going to gain another round of expertise. Pick your favorite 2 skills. We're now really good at very specific things. Probably related to being invisible, stealthing, infiltrating, anything along those lines. At level 14, we are Rogue 7. Here, we gain Evasion. This is a great defensive feature versus AoE spells that would have been much nicer to have a lot earlier, but we're still glad to have it. Doesn't really act like anything in Gloomhaven, still just a good defensive feature though. At level 15, we're Rogue 8, and we gain our next ASI/feat. Here we're going to increase our Charisma to 18, because it has also been trailing behind for a bit too long, and our Inflict Wounds has really been relying on our proficiency bonus to make sure we hit. At level 16, we are Rogue 9, and we finally gain some extra Soul Knife features. Our side-eye became D8s at Rogue 5, and I kind of forgot to mention it. They're also about to become D10 at Rogue 11. Now that's pretty nice, given the features that we just got. Soul Blades is a feature that allows us to use our side-eye to boost a misted attack against an enemy, potentially turning it into a hit. And the key word here is that it's an attack, not a weapon attack. This actually works with our Inflict Wounds, which makes it so much more reliable. We can also use our side-eye to now teleport. We essentially spend the die, roll it, and teleport a number of feet equal to 10 times the number rolled. Thematically, we throw the side blade to where we're going to, but I just think of it as jumping through shadows, probably. The Night Shroud actually does have some teleport, since the Forgotten Circles sort of update when teleport as a feature was actually added. So this is pretty nice to have for us, and it actually works thematically. It's also really nice because it's only a bonus action to use. At level 17, we are level 10 Rogue, and we gain another ASI/feat. This time we are capping our dexterity in order to make our sneak attack as effective as possible. Our Charisma is still sort of trailing behind, but we'll worry about that later. At level 18, we are Rogue 11, and here we gain Reliable Talent. Reliable Talent is a very powerful feature that I talked about with our Scoundrel. It's essentially going to make us an expert at what we do, which in this case is stealthing, sneaking, being a little bit perceptive, and whatever else we decide to pick for our skill proficiencies. Also, a little update on our sneak attack since there hasn't been one in a while. It is now a whopping 6d6 each time we attack. That's really powerful. At level 19, we're going to go to Rogue 12, and we're going to gain our last ASI/feat. Here, I'm going to finally cap our Charisma at 20. It's taken a long time to get here, but you could scale a little bit better if you just skipped the Eldritch Adept feat. However, because that's thematic, and because we still get here anyways, I'm fine with capping our Charisma at 20 at this point. Finally, at level 20, we are Rogue 13, and here we gain the Soul Knife feature, Psychic Veil. Psychic Veil is essentially another once per day free casting of invisibility, but it doesn't actually cast the spell, so it can't be counterspelled, which is pretty nice. Plus, now we can also use our side-eye to use this feature over again if we really want to. Our sneak attack is also now capped, more or less, at a whopping 7d6, which is quite a lot of damage considering that it's going to be psychic damage most of the time when we're attacking, which is something that I don't think is always factored in. Even though we're scaling fairly behind for how much damage we were doing with our sneak attack, It was all the same damage type of the weapon we were using, which were usually always weapons that dealt psychic damage. So that means that it's going to bypass resistance most of the time and actually still be really effective damage, especially consistent damage. All right, so time to summarize the build. We are the Night Shroud and we do not exist. I mean, we do exist, we're just invisible all the time. It's kind of a meme from at least when I played Gloomhaven and I played the Night Shroud character, because the Night Shroud would just turn invisible turn 1, go off and do their own thing and just kill everything, leaving a trail of bodies along the path. For us though, we have 2 free castings of invisibility per day with Shadow Touched and Psychic Veil. We can then use our side eye to cast invisibility again through the Psychic Veil, so theoretically that's an extra 12 castings if all we did for our side eye was just repeat Psychic Veil over and over again. So that's a total of 14 castings of invisibility, which they all last an hour, so that's 14 hours of just being invisible. Plus we have 3 second level spell slots and 3 third level spell slots for an additional 6 castings if we really wanted even more invisibility. Plus we can use sorcery points to get those spell slots back if we wanted to do that instead of meta magic. And we have 1 casting of greater invisibility as well. The only way we could possibly have more access to being invisible is if we had a cloak of invisibility. Even then, that only gives us 2 free hours of invisibility a day, so really, we're technically better than what that cloak is meant to do. But everything extra is just an added bonus. I digress. Besides invisibility, we are also very adept at making darkness, / using darkness-like spells and dealing damage. Both of which the Night Shroud really wants to do. The darkness spell itself, plus the invisibility spells, plus inflict wounds, which deals necrotic damage, are all spells that create darkness in the Gloomhaven sense, at least in my mind. The main disappointing things about our build is that, number 1, we don't have a reliable execute or instant kill. Really, what we're relying on is gaining advantage on our attacks, hopefully critting, and dealing double the amount of damage from either inflict wounds or sneak attack. Or perhaps if we use Quicken Spell and are really lucky, maybe both. An example round of us using Quicken Spell and then landing a sneak attack would dish out 5d10 plus 7d6 from sneak attack on the weapon attack, plus that would actually be 8d6 if we were just using our Psychic Blade or Shadow Blade, and then if we were using the actual Shadow Blade spell, that would be another 3d8, maybe 4d8 if we upcast it. On average, that's going to be north of 55 points of damage, on average at least. And that's not an insane amount, but the fact that makes it really cool is that that can actually be done fairly consistently. We have a lot of castings of inflict wounds, and our sneak attack is just reliable on-demand passive damage. So that 55 on average for 1 big burst round is actually more like 55 on a couple of burst rounds, which would really add up. The potential to crit is really what's going to make us feel like an assassin, as unfortunately we don't have a straight execute, but still hopefully something that will show up at least once per combat. The other regret is that we didn't scale perfectly throughout all of our levels, and we were probably feeling like we were a little held back. But as the Night Shroud, and with all that access to invisibility, with our powerful skills from being a rogue, we didn't necessarily need to shine by just killing things in combat. Maybe killing one thing in a single turn once in a while, but being able to do a lot of utility type effects and like scouting or infiltration outside of combat is also very effective for us. Either way, let me know what you thought of this build or what you would change to get closer to the theme of the Gloomhaven character class. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.